What's the kinkiest thing you've ever done out of pure horn, Enos? I went down on my younger cousin during quarantine. I don't regret it. I live alone, so I got quite lonely several weeks into quarantine, which worked out perfectly because my younger cousin Liz, who was a freshman in college, needed a spot to stay due to school, canceling from the virus. I had an empty room left when my ex-wife moved out and got divorced with me. The last time I saw Liz was about 8 years ago when she was 11. She's 19 now. I remembered her as lanky and awkward. She was like a small girl growing into a spider's body, all limbs. I thought it would be awkward before she showed up, but it turns out we share a lot of common interests, so we got along easily. Movies became a nightly tradition pretty quickly. Around 6, we would each pick a movie we thought the other person might like. Watch one, make dinner, and watch the other. Honestly, my favorite part of Liz being there was the help in the kitchen. It felt like I had a mini Gordon Ramsay in my house. The food was so good. I had my fair share of junk food and pre-made pizza making because my ex-wife grew up eating cereal, junk food, and frozen dinner. Dinner with Liz each night was the beginning of the end for me. I would constantly catch myself reaching out to touch her lower back like I had with a few times I did with my wife, or just staring at the back of her neck, her hair tied up, while she focused on some mundane task like chopping up an onion and resisting the urge to gently kiss her on the shoulder. Last Monday was the first time I caught an idea that she might be interested in me. After the first movie of the night, Liz left to take a shower to wash off after a run she had taken earlier that day while I threw together a pizza. Right after her shower, she surprised me by walking into the living room with just her towel on and asked me how the pizza was turning out. I'd like to lie to you and say that I kept my surprise hidden and acted as if there wasn't a mostly naked 19-year-old suddenly standing in front of me. But after looking her up and down, my eyes lingering on her bare shoulders, then on her small breasts framed by the towel, the hem of the arguably too short for her height towel that ended just below her hips and all the long, sculpted legs that followed, each location for a few moments too long, I tripped over my eloquent reply of good, like a professional middle schooler. Liz just smirked, gave me a crooked smile, and walked back to the bathroom saying, "Well, it smells really good." It took me a while to regather myself after seeing so much skin, but I was able to rebuild my composure and push thoughts of certain barely covered areas into a small but sturdy cage and adjust my pants. As I was pulling the pizza out, Liz walked back into the living room, thankfully wearing more clothes, an old baggy hoodie that was one of her favorites, and some dark black running shorts. She sat down on the couch and buried her nose in her phone while I finished up in the kitchen. Thankfully, it seemed, she was not too concerned with my lingering eyes, and I tried to forget the recent image of so much perfect skin. I cut us a few slices of still hot pizza, brought them out, and started up the movie, thinking it was an odd prank she was pulling or just a joke to throw me off, while a small but loud part of my mind hoped it wasn't a joke at all. Part way through the movie, I noticed Liz was back on her phone, off and on, at some point. She stretched out on the couch, head on one armrest and legs bent, and her feet pressed up against my leg. She kept shifting her legs, trying to get comfortable, until I asked, "Want to stretch them out?" and pat at the tops of my legs. She just smiled at me and stretched them out, letting her feet rest on my lap. I instinctively shifted my hands out from under my blanket and started massaging her cold feet before I realized what I was doing and froze. I slowly looked over and saw her staring at me, a questioning, but not uncomfortable, look on her face. I used to massage Nicole's ex-wife feet all the time like this, just instinct. Sorry. And I started to desperately search for a new place for my hands. Liz spoke up for the first time since the movie started, laughing a little as she spoke. "I don't mind at all. It actually feels really nice. I went on a long run while you were at work, so you won't hear any complaints from me." And so I kept massaging her feet, listening to her breathing and paying almost no attention to the movie. Eventually, her feet were as warm as my hands, and I started moving down her lower legs, giving her caps some attention. This elicited a light moan from Liz, and she said, "Why would Nicole leave this?" I'm sure it was louder than she expected, because I saw her head shoot up and look at me to see if I reacted. I just glanced over and gave her a weak smile, but didn't comment. I could feel her tense under my touch, though. She felt bad for saying it. I turned the movie down a little and said, without looking over, She and I just wanted different things. I don't mean to overshare, but we both wanted kids, and it turns out that I can't. We talked about adoption, but after a while I could tell she wanted her own kids. I felt like it was a sign that we should adopt, and she very much didn't. We found out about a year ago, and that was kind of the beginning of the end. It was pretty quiet for a while, as we both just quietly watched the rest of the movie, and I continued rubbing her feet and legs. The movie ended, and credits were scrolling when Liz pulled her feet off my lap and sat up, stretching long arms arching above her tiled back head, her neck incredibly exposed and amazingly bare in the low light of the mostly dark living room with her hair and her braid behind her head. She stood up, shuffled over closer to me, and sat down, our legs touching through the blanket I still had over my leg. Without looking over to me, just looking forward, she said, "I'm really glad you're letting me stay with you. It's nice being in a peaceful place for once. And I'm sorry I made you think about Nicole. I really didn't mean to." I brushed it off and told her to not worry about it. We sat in relative silence as the credits scrolled. Just the music behind the credits filled the void, but it was strangely peaceful. We didn't need to fill the silence, and it was really nice just sitting with someone who clearly cared. Eventually, Liz broke the silence, shifting in her seat and turning to face me directly. "Thanks for the massage." I started to turn to face her and make some lame comment, but she reached across my chest with one arm, behind my neck with the other, pulled my head gently sideways and kissed me on the cheek. It felt really nice, her breath on my neck as she moved closer to me, the surprise contact of just a simple touch across my chest, and her warm lips pressed against my cheek sent a cool fire running down my legs, and I could feel myself reacting. Thank God for blankets and semi-constrictive jeans. She lingered for a few moments, and I could tell she was staring at me, searching for a full reaction. I knew I couldn't stay there for long and make a good decision, so I gently took and moved her hands off my neck, stood up and said, "I still need shower. Mind putting the pizza away?" Liz gave me a sad smile in the low light of the living room and nodded. I very pointedly did not run to the bathroom, turned the shower on cold, and stripped out of my clothes. My quite average pee-pee had relaxed a little bit from Liz's kiss, but was still resting at about half-mast, hoping for release. I jumped into the shower and turned my chest into the cold water to hopefully knock some sense into my foggy head. Despite the cold shower, thoughts of Liz kept me up for at least an hour, but I was able to get to sleep eventually. The following morning, I got called into work. They needed extra help getting stuff done, after some workers were off due to getting sick from COVID. I told Liz I'd be home kind of late and to not wait for me for dinner. Well, the mess up at work was worse than I expected, and I ended up getting home right after 9 p.m. stressed and ready for a shower. One quick hot shower later, I walked into the living room to find a cup of hot tea and a plate of warm pizza sitting on the floor in front of the couch, with Liz sitting on the couch behind. I thought to myself, she is such wifey material, but had to remind myself, this is my cousin. She pointed at the ground in front of her and said, "It's payback time." She made a massaging motion with her hands. She has some freakishly strong hands, so when she started working my shoulders and neck, I couldn't think of anything except the exact moment we were in. Liz found the perfect place between pleasure and pain, and there were moments where I was about to wince away from the pressure to let her know that it was a bit too much, but she seemed to know, backing off just enough to ride that line. I thought the what felt like hours-long massage was over, but she tilted my head back onto her knees and started massaging my forehead gently, moving down to my temples and running her fingers through my beard. Guys, it was heaven on earth. My eyes were closed, so I didn't see her kiss until she pressed her lips against my forehead and lingered for just a few moments. She leaned down close to my ear and whispered, "Now I think you owe me, right?" I tilted my head to the side and kissed the inside of her hand. "Yeah, I guess I do." I watched her ass bounce just a bit in her running short, so she walked down the hall towards her bedroom. I thought about Liz in a new light. I knew she was into me and started to play tricks on the dicks, as they call it. Wednesday. Today is the day where I'm going to repay her debt by turning her world upside down. While Liz was in the shower, I got a few things ready. I stripped my bed down to the mattress cover. Sheets needed to be washed anyway. Laid out a beach towel I had on the bed. got some of the rubbing oils I had bought for my ex-wife. I heard the water turn off after some time, and Liz walked by and just her towel again. She stepped back out of her room into the hallway, a bit of moisture still clinging to her neck, her hair wrapped up in a towel. "What are you setting up in here? You upped the game last night? I don't want to be in debt forever." She raised an eyebrow at me. "While I'll be in just a few, let me put some clothes on." A few moments later, Liz walked in wearing some sweats and a sports bra. She sat down cross-legged on the towel with her mostly bare back to me. She glanced at me over her shoulder, her hair tied up in a messy bun, her light dusting of freckles on the bridge of her nose, uncovered by any makeup. "Go ahead." I poured a little oil into my hands and warmed it up, and starting where her sports bra crossed her back, moved up her spine to the base of her neck, and started massaging. I felt her side deeply and leaned back into my hands. The small upper portion of her back, framed by her bra straps, was soon completely massaged, so I moved my hands under her straps, waiting for a reaction. I didn't notice any reaction, so I pulled her straps off of her shoulders and let them rest on her arms and worked her shoulders for a while. Liz spoke up for the first time. "Can you close your eyes?" I was lost in the feeling of her smooth skin I didn't quite understand. "What? Close your eyes." I closed my eyes, hands still on her shoulders, and said, "Okay, now what?" Soon I felt her pulling her bra off past my hands. I felt her weight shift, and she moved a few things around. It felt like hours, my topless cousin so close to me while I waited in self-imposed darkness. "Okay, open up." Liz was lying on her stomach on the towel she had pulled to the side facing the head of the bed turned to face me. Bras just get in the way, right? She was nervous, I could tell. There was a bit of shake to her voice, so I tried to set her at ease. I laughed a little bit. "I don't mind at all. They do get in the way, that's for sure." I moved over her, so I kneeling over her upper legs and poured a little more oil into my hands. I heard somewhere that you should give a massage in percentages, split wherever you're massaging into a big grid, and work each spot the same amount. I tried to mentally break her back into 50 sections and spend about 10 seconds for each section. Starting low, I worked my fingers into the muscle just above her hips. I worked my way just a bit lower towards the center of her back and moved up her spine, adding oil as I needed it. Soon I was pressing into her shoulder blades, working the dense muscle she had there. The sun at this point was cutting through the partially opened blinds and landing on her back, causing her skin to glisten. I moved my hands down to her lower back and slowly moved my hands up her sides, just tracing her skin, not pressing with much force at all. I ever so gently grazed the sides of her breasts with my fingertips, and I could hear her breathing catch, then increase a bit. Liz bounced her legs a bit beneath me. "Can you do my feet and legs again? It felt really nice last time." "Sure thing. Do you want to change into shorts then? Your sweats will get in the way." Liz reached under her stomach and pulled her pants string, loosening the waist. "You can just take them off if that's okay with you." I stood up off the bed. Her feet were almost dangling off the edge of the bed at this point, and pulled the waist of her pants down. She was wearing simple panties, dark blue underneath her sweats. As I pulled, she raised her butt into the air slightly to make it easier. Once the pants' waist was near her knees, she pressed her hips into the bed, lifting her knees slightly so I could remove them entirely. I tossed them to the head of the bed and poured more oil into my hands. I started at the heels of her feet, gently massaging where the tendon connects at the heel, and moved up to the balls of her feet, working oil between each of her toes. I moved past her ankles and massaged her calf starting at the knee and worked my way back towards her feet. Once I reached her feet, I poured more oil into my hands and moved my hands very slowly. It around 2 minutes, from the base of her feet past her calves, behind her knees, along her hamstrings, and stopped just below her panties and began to massage back down to her knees. I could hear her breathing getting deeper and more forced, and I could tell she was getting turned on, and I could feel myself reacting as well, growing from the half-mast state I've been in for the last few hours to full hardness, hearing her react to my hands. Once I reached her knees, I lifted my hands entirely, surprising her by starting right at the base of her ass again. This time, though, I intentionally grazed the hem of her panties, moving just a bit further up than last time, and made my way down towards her knees again, though this time much faster. I ran my hands up her legs again, this time massaging the point just below her panties, and then running my fingers just under the hem, massaging the base of her ass for a few. I didn't want to push things any further. Part of me feared I already had until Liz turned her head and said, "Could you massage my quads as well? They're pretty tense after my run this morning." She propped herself up a bit on her elbow and turned more fully towards me. Her breasts were still pressed into the bed, but only barely hidden. She looked into my eyes and I could tell she was wondering if this was okay or not, but clearly wanting to continue. "Yeah," I responded, "flip on over." And so she did. Liz rolled over, careful to stay on the towel and not get oil on the mattress cover. Her breasts were imprinted slightly from the towel, and her small nipples were stiff, just asking to be touched. I was wearing athletic shorts, so when I climbed onto the bed and kneeled over her lower legs to get a better angle, she no doubt saw my arousal pulling at the loose fabric. I started at the tops of her legs, just below her hips, and just traced under the hem of her panties first, but quickly moved down and worked the entire muscle. Keeping my eyes on the task at hand was hard with so many excellent places to look. The slowly smoothing skin of her breasts, her tense nipples, and the tiny beads of sweat gathering on her forehead. The points of her hip bones against her skin, the lines on the edge of her panties disappearing between her legs, and the slightly wet spot in the center of her underwear. After a short time, I stopped massaging and placed my hands further up the bed, on either side of Liz, and leaned forward, bringing my head close to hers, and whispered in her ear, "If this is too much, you can tell me and I'll stop, okay?" I could feel Liz's hands touch my hips, run up my sides under my shirt, grab my shirt, and pull it towards my head. I took the hint and sat up, pulling my shirt over my head. She grabbed my arm before I could sit back, pulled me in with one hand on the back of my head and kissed me. Her soft lips tightly closed at first, pressing against mine firmly, but not crushing my lips against my teeth. We continued to kiss, bodies apart for the most part, but connected at the lips. Soon her mouth parted with mine, and our tongues explored each other's mouth. Her lips were warm, hot even, and her mouth tasted clean, slightly sweet. She bit at my lip, and her breathing got heavy. Her hands ran down my chest and pulled at my hips, but I pulled away, breaking the kiss in the process. She sighed in slight disappointment. "I'm trying to remain debt-free here, so just lay back. Let me take care of you for a while longer." I kneeled over her upper legs, poured more oil into my hands, and starting at her stomach, rubbed the oil into her skin. I moved up her abs and along her rib cage, careful to not touch her nips as I ran my hands along the outer edge of her breasts, along the top, and down the center of her chest. I did this a few more times, getting closer and closer to her nips each time, grazing her areolas on the last pass. Instead of traveling back up her tight frame, I rested my hands on her hips and worked my fingers under the straps of her underwear. Liz looked me straight in the eyes, her face flushed from my touch, and raised her hips off the bed, allowing me to pull her panties completely off after I rocked back onto my heels and she bent her knees. We kept eye contact the entire time. She stretched her legs back out under mine, and I resumed running my hands along her torso. This pass over her breasts, I ran my hands up her torso, fingers along her side, and stopped at the base of her breasts. Then, rotating my hands towards her center, I let her nipples glide under and between each of my fingers. I drew my hands down her frame, rotating my fingers back out to her sides, and did the same motion again, this time slower so her nipples were pressed into her breasts more fully with each of my fingers. Liz closed her eyes and began moaning softly as I continued to touch her. Soon I moved back and stood at the edge of the bed, placed my hands on her knees, and pressed them gently apart, making sure this was okay. I could tell there was part of her that was embarrassed. She turned away from me and closed her eyes as she spread her legs apart. Hairless, it looked like she had just shaved, possibly during her shower just before, and she was wet. I could see strings of gruel attached to her labia as they spread apart for the first time in the hour or so I'd been massaging her. I lifted one of her legs and kissed her along her foot, down her calf, lowering myself onto the bed as I kissed along her inner thigh. I reached the center and focused on Liz's breathing. I could tell she wanted my touch, but I simply breathed on her vag and moved to her other leg instead, kissing along the top inner thigh and moving up her leg to her calf and foot. Next, I moved in and kissed both of her inner thighs, one after the other, getting closer and closer to the prize. I leaned my head against the side of her leg and gently licked the outside of slit, tasting her juices for the first time. It tasted like clean vag, not sweet, but clean. I focused on Liz's breathing to figure her out as I moved from her left to her right, dragging my tongue across her entrance as I did, eliciting a sharp breath. I ran my tongue gently along the other side and sucked this side of her labia into my mouth, running my tongue along it as I did. I repositioned myself, placing her legs over my shoulders and placing my hands across her stomach, holding her hips in place. I gently licked her from the bottom to the top, just barely touching her with the tip of my tongue. She moaned loudly and moved one hand to her mouth to keep quiet. I reached up and grabbed her elbow, pulling that hand down and placing it on my head to encourage her to set the pace and be loud if she wanted to, and continue to lick. I began circling her breasts with my hands, occasionally pinching her nipples as I applied more pressure with my tongue, exploring her more intently, pressing my tongue as far into her as I could. I could tell this was getting her close already, as I focused on her breathing, but I didn't want it to end so soon. I let up, suddenly becoming gentle again, and I could hear her breath of slight frustration and a slight whimper, begging for release. I moved one hand to her lower stomach, pulling her stomach up towards her head, and gently sucked at her more exposed CLT. I heard Liz whisper, "Holy shit," and knew this was the beginning of the end for her. I kept the rhythm the same for a while, but varied the pressure. Soft, then firm, then soft for a few, then hard for a few. I focused on Liz's breathing, adapting the rhythm slightly to match her breaths. I moved down slowly and pressed my tongue hard against her opening and heard her let out a heavy breath. She grabbed my head with both hands, rotated her hips up slightly, and pulled me into her. She came hard on my tongue and I buried it inside of her. I could feel her tensing against my tongue several times, and she moaned loudly with the same pattern. I didn't move for quite a while as her shuddering slowed and her breathing became more normal. Once she was down from what I assumed was CLT.9, I started to slowly lick her, bottom to top, cleaning her off as she twitched as I moved around her sensitive folds. I sat up and looked at her, sweat gathered in sections across her body, and she started back at me with a somewhat shocked but very happy smile and said quite simply, "Wow." I thought to myself, if I knew ink felt this great, I would have done it sooner.